Welcome to Beyond the Call podcast, where we tell the stories of those people behind the jobs we rely on. We go into the good, the bad and the ugly, and we shine a light in what can be a dark place. Just a warning, the content can be graphic and distressing, so please use your discretion. Please like and subscribe on your podcast platform and our social media. And if you have feedback, I read every single one. Let's get on to this episode of Beyond the Call. G'day everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Call. Today I have Alan Playford as my guest. Alan is a fascinating story. He is a very long-term paramedic from New South Wales who has probably forgotten more than I ever learnt. And he's releasing a book. And we've got him on to tell us his life story and go through some of the things that he's achieved in his life. So he's actually one of the, from what I've read, he's one of the highest awarded civilians in Australia, which is just amazing. And we'll get into that later on. So Alan, welcome to the show, mate. Great to have you on here.
Thank you so much, Peter.
So let's start. You're a New South Wales boy through and through?
Yes, I'm afraid so. Come state of origin time, very proud to be a New South Wales boy.
I'm wearing a blue shirt, but you'll see the ball in the background. That's definitely a Queensland ball. So when did you become a paramedic and what made you get into to be a paramedic?
I guess it takes us back to the year of 1975, and there was no such thing as paramedicine then. And I think that's the way they were comfortable with leaving things. But this upstart of a doctor from St. Vincent's Hospital in Sydney changed all that. And I'd been in the service. They had an honorary sort of component to the service where you worked part-time before you became a full-time officer. And so I had 2 years at that, maybe a little longer than 2 years, because the first paramedicine course started at St. Vincent's Hospital in Sydney in 1976. And course one contained 22 people, of which 11 dropped out with the intensity that Dr. Wright applied to the course. And it was interesting to see his thinking about that, because what occurred was that he would say, I've got all the brains in the... He was the director of Anaesthetics Australia at the time. And he said, look, I've got all the brains in the world downstairs at St. Vincent's accident emergency. He said, but they can't put a cannula in. They can't intubate someone. Someone's got to come in specially from one of the levels in the hospital and do it for them. I want guys that can do that at the roadside or the bedside and don't have to be coached through it. I just know that when they finish this course, they can do it.
Who are good with their hands.
And essentially, as my wife just interviewed, are good with their hands. So a modicum of brain power, but essentially a lot of physical application to understand how a chest drain goes in, to understand how an ET tube is placed, to understand the different sizes in cannula compared to what you're facing, cardiac arrest or severe trauma or whatever. You know, you don't go to these things and put a 22 gauge in. You go and you're going, as he said, if you're going into tiger country, you take an elephant gun. And
so even in the 70s, you were doing intubations and stuff as
absolutely.
part of your training.
Yep. From February 1976, I think it was the first course that went through St. V's. And look, he was as you got to know him, he was a tremendous human being. But to get this launched, he had to be tough, and it was up to young blokes like us to understand that toughness equated to quality, and that quality he wanted on the streets. He didn't want people coming into those accident emergency centres with excuses, because the medical fraternity was not keen on paramedicine, and he had a lot of thinking about this and a lot of manoeuvring through politics, through the ambulance hierarchy, and the government of the day to sort of get it launched. So that took a lot of tenacity. And when that course 1 came out, they in turn faced a lot of hostility. It wasn't welcomed in the ranks. And the old notion of swoop and scoop, as the notion had been, where, we were single out, so you'd get there to the accident or the bedside, you're by yourself. Somebody had been cardiac arrest. How do you do CPR by yourself? There was no defibrillators or anything. Get them out into the ambulance, appoint somebody who was reasonably responsible around you to drive while you stayed in the back of a bouncing ambulance, applying very mediocre CPR, and inevitably the outcome was always the same at hospital. So I think as a young amber, you sort of knew what was being asked of you, in that you weren't going to see many successful outcomes, and you would go through your career in that vein. Never a proud service, and had done a whole lot of good since those early days at the turn of the century. But here we are, we're in 1976, and this guy's about to change all of that. So by the time I entered St. Vincent's Hospital for the exams, it was 2 years later, was 1968, and I was in course 6. My wife had difficulty with our first child, and I asked, could it be deferred? I was supposed to go to course 3, then 4. She was still having trouble, so I went to course 6. Arrived in Sydney. By then, the original 5 courses had been through, and the hostility that they met was just astonishing. People that I'd known as
within the health
ambos.
system.
Pardon?
Within the health system or within the ambulance system?
Within the ambulance system. They didn't like change, whatever.
Yeah.
And then as it seeped through, the daunting expectation of passing these exams, and humiliation if you didn't pass, was perceived by many as something that I won't even undertake, because I don't want to go through that humiliation. So there was a lot of pressure on people. And so Bob had perceived what he called the pre-primer course, and that was you had to have a thorough understanding of anatomy, physiology, medical terminology, and all aspects of pre-hospital care before you submitted to Rozelle in Sydney to do what they call the pre-primer exams. They went for 3 weeks, and if you passed those pre-primer exams, you could then pass on to his jurisdiction at St. Vincent's Hospital. Then the course proper ensued after that. So you remained at St. Vincent's Hospital for the next 6 months, and it was, I would say it was from 7:30 in the morning. We wouldn't leave St. V's till 7 o'clock at night, travel back to the lodgings at the ambulance accommodation in Rozelle, study till midnight, and then back to it again. So we're exhausted little people at that stage. And then to face the final exams at the end of that was a somewhat daunting prospect.
Wow. And when you came on road, was there results almost straight away? Like, did people see results from the extra training?
Look, the short answer is yes. It was like night and day, because he obtained defibrillators, which were quite unheard of in the service. And there were a lot of doctors advising him who said, look, you just need to be like Dr. Pantridge in Northern Ireland. Just set up a cardiac ambulance that solely concentrates on cardiac events, cardiac arrest drill, and knowing how to conduct a thorough line of cardiac work. Then others argued, no, there should be the full complement. Not only should you know the cardiac component, but trauma is a vitally important as well. So he recruited a fellow from America called Dr. Ron Stewart, and Dr. Stewart collaborated with him. He's the fellow that famously was the advisor to the American show Emergency with Roy and Johnny, the two paramedics from Los Angeles, who made this weekly series called Emergency. Dr. Stewart was the advisor on that. And it took a lot of people a long time to accept that things were going to change no matter what. The Americans had the advantage, I suppose you could say, of their soldiers coming out of Vietnam, where they perfected para-rescue. They formed the name paramedic, I guess. They formed para-rescue in Vietnam. So they would come down with a helicopter to the battlefield. People who were shot, maimed, whatever, would be treated with advanced life support procedures in the field, packaged onto the helicopter, continuing that treatment in flight, arriving at what the Americans termed the MASH unit, and lives were saved. How Dr. Stewart got that concept across to his American counterparts, he could tell the same story as Dr. Wright here in Australia. But the two of them collaborated, incorporated Dr. Stewart's concept. Bob perfected it in New South Wales, and slowly it started. There were many hurdles for Dr. Wright, not least of which was getting the drugs that would be needed to treat these people through the upper and the lower house of the state parliament. Mm-hmm. And so in my time, starting in 1968, I've been on the paramedic, on the advanced, we weren't allowed to be called paramedics. We were ALS, or advanced life support. And yep. Don't you fellas get ahead of yourself. You're lucky that we give you that designation. So, so pull your heads in, it was. I'd been 3 months and I'd earned a bit of leave, so I'm away with my wife on the upper north coast of New South Wales. And I got a phone call and they said, Al, I'm just about to tell you about your shortest career in history. So what are you talking about? They said, your career's over. I said, I don't. That's all right. I don't know what I've done to earn that little curiosity. And they said, no, the paramedics are finished altogether. I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, look, a fellow in Sydney called Tony King had gone out to a very famous Australian artist called Johnny O'Keefe. Johnny O'Keefe was selling #1 single records, songs, very well-known Australian artist. And he's in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and a 000 call indicates that he's not breathing and something's wrong. So Tony King is dispatched to him. The Sydney people weren't allowed to have another paramedic with them. They said, no, you will have an ambulance officer and a paramedic. We're not going to grant 2 paramedics like Bob had asked them, because if you're going to intubate and draw up drugs, decipher what's on the ECG screen, adopt the appropriate treatment, there needs to be 2 of you. And he designated one will be called the electrician, one will be called the gas man. Gas man looks after tubing, airway. Electrician looks after deciphering what's on the ECG screen, drawing up the appropriate drugs after he's cannulated. And so it takes 2 people, not according to the old Ambos in Sydney, who said, no, that it'll be 1 paramedic or nothing at all. So Tony King went to Johnny O'Keefe, found him unconscious, asystolic, and realised that after he intubated him, the only thing that's going to make a difference here, not knowing the history, is adrenaline. So the trucks carried the adrenaline. Tony drew it up, administered to Johnny O'Keefe, and he came back into a viable rhythm and cardioverted. And Tony packaged him up to transport, bagging him all the way to St Vincent's Hospital. The ambo in the front drove the ambulance. Tony's in the back with Johnny O'Keefe. When he got to St Vincent's Hospital, one of the doctors there asked, could he look at his case sheet? And Bob said later, why didn't you just give me a call up in intensive care? I'd have come down and signed the case sheet, all finished. No, this doctor got hold of it and said, you fellows aren't allowed to give adrenaline yet, hasn't been passed. And he'd been watching the whole system very closely. Took it to the Minister for Health, and the Minister for Health was appealed to that he should stop this paramedic or this advanced life support concept and finish it up forthwith. And so where I was on holidays, this phone call came and said, you've got the shortest career on record, Al, you're finished. I said, what? Couldn't take it in. Well, he said the intensive care truck is now parked in the mechanics bay at the back. It's locked up and it's not to be touched. So you revert to being an ambo and think yourself lucky that you've had 3 months, but it's all finished. Mm. So we all looked at one another in Newcastle and said, crikey, what must Bob Wright be going through? So 6 weeks later, there'd been representations after researching the whole event. Sister Valda Wild, who was a specialist at St Vincent's Hospital, and Dr. Bob Wright went to the Minister for Health, Minister Stewart, and convinced him that they should give it another go, that paramedicine does work and you can save lives before they reach hospital. It must have appealed to Minister Stewart because he reconstituted the paramedics on strict provisions that some of the drugs that were in our drug kit be removed that hadn't been through the Parliament. Adrenaline would be approved forthwith, and all those paramedics that passed will be reinstated, and mind you that you behave yourselves. And so paramedicine restarted again. Tony King was punished. A punishment in those days was to be sent to the control room, which was viewed as a punishment. Tony went to the control room and was watched closely, where 6 months later, the poor fellow couldn't stand it and said, I'm leaving. And Bob said he was one of the best students he'd ever had, So right from the word go, the precept was that if you think you're so clever, come down off your high horse because we're watching you like a hawk. So we all restarted on the road, and immediately, as I alluded to before, with early defibrillation, lives were being saved at the bedside, arriving in hospital with a good output, good blood pressure, and even extubated and then talking to you on some occasions, And we said, well, here's the evidence, review it and see if that compares with what you had before. And so slowly but surely it took off. I do remember on the 53rd cardiac arrest that we'd reverted amongst the group in Newcastle, and there was only, mind you, 6 of us, the 53rd cardioversion was a young girl and 22 years of age, and it was picked up by the newspapers, and this young girl had an event, was shocked, got her heart restarted, and here she was. Well, when a photo appeared of this young kid that otherwise would have been dead, then the media picked it up, and a lot of pressure was applied to the ambulance service to, well, why don't you kick this off in numbers where lives can be saved in earnest? And so after that young lady had two more events where I was lucky to be on her first event. David Reed, one of the now paramedic, or then after, but an AMBO then, applied really good CPR. We came down 2 shocks later, and she's viable. She went to, being a young kid, she went to another event where another one of the paramedics, Ronnie Brown, resuscitated her for the second time, and then Johnny Gleason resuscitated her for the third time. Medical science said, do not have any children. We've just perfected this drug. This new drug's come out called Mexatil, and Mexatil is this wonder medication for people with cardiac history like yourself. Anyway, she was told not to have children. She had 2 kids, married the harbour master of Newcastle Harbour, and lived happily ever after. Well, when the media picked that up, there was an automatic boost, and comment on radio, television, and what have you, added to the viability of the concept. And so this was happening in Sydney and in Wollongong. It wasn't just us alone here. And slowly but surely, the worm started to turn, and that's the way paramedicine kicked off.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it wasn't. So was it only basically your level that carried defibs at that time? And am I right in saying it didn't go widespread until Kerry Packer had his cardiac arrest?
No. Kerry Packer came along a lot later in the cycle, but I think it was slow and steady wins the race, and I didn't know much about the media, but in looking back at it, the media played a big part in paramedicine being accepted, because the old World War II AMBOs that were now superintendents and in charge, the state superintendent, they didn't see the necessity for this. The traditional ambulance service was all we needed, and we're happy to go with that. So poor old Bob Wright, he faced some very difficult times getting equipment, training, vehicles, appropriate vehicles, and whatever. So, I think Australia needs to take their hat off to him.
Yeah. In all sorts of, in every medical setting, I guess, for anything to progress, somebody's got to be willing to push the envelope.
Oh, he pushed the envelope. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. He was a tough cookie, but when you passed and into your career, he became your best mate. He was, there was none of this Dr. Wright. It was all always first names and a pat on the back and let's have a beer, So that kind of,
and that's great because I mean we're all on the same team. That's ultimately what it's about. We're all on the same team, all wanting the same results.
Well, I agree with you now, but it wasn't the same team then. They'd have a union meeting and go down and spray the side of your car with scab. They loosen the wheel nuts on the back wheel of your car.
Yeah, right.
It was serious stuff, and people say that today and say, no, well, that's true. The feeling was so high at times.
Yeah.
And that was particularly evidenced when we introduced helicopters.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next thing. So how did you end up with the helicopter situation?
Well, there's a lot of us that have been in the Army due to the Australian National Service, and a lot of the boys that served in Vietnam, they'd seen it firsthand, what you'd call a medevac. It was called a dust-off in Vietnam. And so they're on the streets of Sydney, Newcastle and Wollongong, and they're saying, well, instead of these lap dashes by ambulance to a scene 40, 50 k's away where people are trapped in a head-on accident or something or other, why not reduce that time and distance by using a helicopter? And so at that time in 1975, the Wales, it's called the Wales Rescue Helicopter then, which was really just servicing the beaches. in summer. Only flew in summertime, and
Okay.
and they'd park on distant beaches, waiting for a call, and then somebody swept off at a beach 30 kilometres away, and the IRB would go out and pluck them out of the water and bring them back to the beach. By the time the helicopter got warmed up, took off, and was getting there, the person was back at the beach. And one of the fellows said in 1968, 6 months after I began, he said, "You're in Nasha, and whatever you saw all this, why can't we have you paramedics on board the helicopter?" And we said, "Well, it's run by Surf Lifesaving. Do you think that's possible?" Yeah, we do. So, a long story short, they went to Surf Lifesaving, we went to the ambulance, and the firm answer was no, not happening. So, as time went by, there were events where people were trapped on mountains out the back of Newcastle, and the ambos said, "Gee, wouldn't a helicopter have been handy to pluck that person out of there, And and so there was a lot of discussion with a bit of movement, and they said, "Al, this will never happen till you get it to the State Industrial Commission. The AMBO management's not going to move. The AMBOs themselves are having enough trouble accepting paramedicine, let alone a helicopter. So you're going to have to find someone in the State Industrial Complex who will recognise proven technology, and whoever has written about that or can provide expert acknowledgement of that to the State Industrial Commission is when you'll see something happen." So two of us, Jeff Marlborough and myself, were elected by the group to register this with the State Industrial Commission and then see about how it could be implemented. Well, if we thought that was going to be easy, none of it. And so from early 1969, there were half a dozen meetings in Sydney where vehement opposition was the order of the day. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess. And all sorts of opposition were put up down there. People would come in from other areas wanting to talk to the commission. They saw a helicopter with advanced life support on it. They would do their best to get away from the scene and get the person to hospital before it could possibly land. And, there was all sorts of toing and froing. We owe the fact that a Dr. Decker Tardy came along from the RAAF, who'd written a book on aeromedical evacuation from combat zones. And he put together a very, what you would say, convincing argument, and presented it to Commissioner Clark of the State Industrial Commission. And after 6 long meetings over 2 years, Commissioner Clark said, "Finally, I've got written proof here from an expert." And he said, "The thing that I would give as an additive to this is, it appears to me that if you implement this, here, there's no one shooting at you. In Vietnam, they were shooting at the helicopters. The enemy was on the ground, ground fire and whatever. He said, here in Australia, no one's shooting at you. I grant that helicopters will begin with the ambulance paramedic advanced life support forthwith." And so on the 10th of October, 1980, we were granted formal permission to begin. In Newcastle and Wollongong, not Sydney. Sydney was absolutely vehement that it wouldn't occur. And so we had then a helicopter that was only available for 6 months of the year through the summer season, the swimming season in New South Wales. And if this was going to be working, it had to go 12 months of the year round. And so we obtained a champion in the Newcastle City Council, Lord Mayor Joy Cummings, joined with other notorieties in Newcastle, and namely the manager of the Wales Bank, who said that if we achieved 50 jobs in 6 months, they would look toward financing the helicopter 12 months of the year around. Well, we got 80 jobs in that 6 months. And he said, well, there's the proof. We give the funding for 12 months of the year round. So what occurred then was a pilot, a crewman, and 2 paramedics would be aboard the helicopter for what was determined to be of a serious nature. Now, that would incorporate trauma as well as cardiac. If someone at a far distant location up the coast from here, 100 k's away, was in a doctor's surgery and had a severe cardiac event going on, then the helicopter would bring them to Newcastle, where the expertise lay in the Royal Newcastle Hospital, the Mater Hospital, and Belmont Hospital, 3 hospitals here. But probably the Royal contained the expertise that was needed. And so the 100 kilometres from that location to the hospital was greatly reduced in time. And so, pardon me. And so as time went by, we could adequately demonstrate that within 3 years we had something like 2,000 responses. And it was convincing material. And that went back to the monitoring committee that would meet in Sydney to discuss problems, the good outcomes, the bad outcomes, where we sat with equipment, and how we were utilising it from the platform of the helicopter. And so with 2000...
So back in those days, did you do night missions as well?
We did night missions, yes. It was called seat of the pants flying, actually. And I recall that we had one terrific pilot, Ian Osborne, and Aussie would say, we've got to smash on the Putty Road. Now, that's 100 kilometres west of Newcastle, and it's 9 o'clock at night. Said, what's your navigational trick for getting to the Putty Road? He said, I just measure it in time. And he said, like we've done in daytime when there's just 8/8 cloud, we can't see the ground. He said, I lift off, time for 25 minutes, and then just let down through the cloud, and then you can see the Putty Road laying below. So we either go right or left, 5 kilometres either way. Oh, there's the accident there. We set down, and you guys go to work. He was, you wouldn't do that today. It'd all be by GPS and everything, but it was seat of the pants stuff,
Yeah. And did hospitals have landing pads?
No. And the trouble we faced with just a simple thing like a landing pad. Joy Cummings, to her great credit, gave us what we call Fletcher Park in Newcastle. And Fletcher Park was opposite where the modern-day police station is at the top, where the old Royal Newcastle Hospital was, and we could land next to the statue to Mr. Fletcher. And the staff the hall porter and a nursing sister would come up to the helicopter, put the patient on, and we'd just keep bagging away if there was a post-arrest or something like that, and escorted down into the accident and receiving area at the hospital. And that went on for, 3 years or so, till finally we had a more permanent landing zone. When the John Hunter Hospital was developed out here, they even said, we'll put the helipad. It was an afterthought, because there was still some skeptics. Yeah. And we said, well, that's 600 metres from accident emergency. What if it's teeming rain? So Apex came along and said, we'll build you a walkway awning over it. And this particular set of doctors said, no. That money can be spent more easily on. So we'd walk from the helicopter to the A&E in teeming rain, someone in cardiac arrest been bagged, and we'd arrive in there bedraggled and wet. But, they're the trials and tribulations that development of such a concept went through. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you guys didn't go through that, we wouldn't have what we've got now.
Yes, it certainly develops. And, that's, I've contained that in part of the book as well, that early development of helicopters. So, Poor old
It's
Sydney
something
languished
people
on.
take for granted so much now, but they've got no idea about the logistics about how to even start that type of thing. And as you've alluded to, most people don't realize how influential wartime is on paramedicine in every aspect.
Oh, that's right. It's been the example right through history. You know, you go to World War II, you go to the Korean War, like the MASH series on TV. It was the genesis of helicopters for pre-hospital care, and
Yep.
developed more so in the Vietnam conflict. So
Yep.
warfare,
And even now that, there's warfare trauma things that are happening that influences now.
exactly. Well, even look back to World War One. Dr. Thomas, who invented the Thomas splint. If you were a soldier and you had a fractured femur on the battlefield, you were dead. You died
Yep.
from it.
Yep.
Dr. Thomas comes along and invents the Thomas splint out of warfare, and suddenly no one dies of fractured femur anymore, Just the simple thing.
People don't realise that you can bleed out from a fractured femur.
Exactly.
I started in 2005, and we were taught Thomas splints, but they were being rolled out for the tractions. They were kind of phased out around 2005.
Yeah, and that traction splint has gone through so many adaptations since.
Absolutely.
Those flimsy little ones now, that are just like a telescope thing plugged together.
Yeah, the CT6s or whatever they're called. Yeah. I mean, they're definitely effective when you put them on. There is relief for the patient, but yeah, those. I think the hardest part about the Thomas splint was learning how to do the bottle knot.
Famous bottle knot. Yeah.
Yep.
And when you do it,
All
people
right.
were amazed when you can actually do the bottle knot. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not something I would not know how to do it right now. Because I never put a Thomas splint on in the field, but I have put on Donways and CT6s. Okay. So how did you end up doing some of these other, in chronological order, what's your next major adventure?
Well, I guess, paramedicine was developing. The relationship with Dr. Wright and the ambulance service was coming to an end because of the extreme pressure that was placed on the guy. A Dr. Selleck came and took his place in Sydney. And so the courses that developed after Bob left, swapped over from St Vincent's Hospital to Royal North Shore under Dr. Selleck, and paramedicine was now starting to get into the realms of being accepted. The evidence was there in the amount of cardiac arrests that were now walking around the city instead of in graves, and too much to ignore. So for us blokes who were in the field for now going on 10 years, it was a time of accumulating experience and developing those things that Bob had taught. And very much in my mind comes along the note explaining the crush syndrome. And the crush syndrome was something that people like to mock and say, that's totally implausible, that won't work. And Bob had gone to great lengths to develop the idea that it does work. And so some of those events came along from simple things, like I remember on the industrial highway, a forklift had overturned. Now, you wouldn't think a forklift, I wouldn't have thought before a forklift would have that much weight in it. It certainly does. And this poor fellow's trapped under the forklift, has fractured his femur. And so, as Bob alluded to, not only do you have hyperkalemia, but you've got severe blood loss. How do you apply tourniquets when someone's under a forklift? That when you lift that weight and you've got the toxins coming back into the cardiac cycle and you've got a cardiac arrest, not to mention the severe blood loss that you've just released. And so to give advanced life support, 50 mils of sodium bicarbonate was really testing the notion that you can make a difference. Really? Sodium bicarbonate? Well, don't forget, you've only got Hemixel as a fluid replacement to obviate the loss of blood. But you've got to apply those tourniquets. You've got to watch the ECG screen for the tall peak T waves indicating hyperkalemia, and you've got very little time to reverse things before that person actually dies, Yep. And so, we'd listen to this. It just it wasn't conceivable. And I went back to my early years as an AMBO, and I went to the Broadmeadow rail yards, and I've got this guy jammed between the bumpers of a shunting train. And the poor fella's caught at waist height. He was one of the railway workers. He's got the train is right through him, and he's thoroughly squashed. And he's being held up by some of his workmates, but he's talking with me. He's talking like we're conversing now,
Yeah.
And there was no paramedics, no advanced life support in those days. So it came time that the bumpers had to be pulled apart. They were released, and he died immediately.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you have that in your experience, and then Bob Wright comes along and says, you can potentially reverse that by doing this, this, and this. And so when I got to the forklift job, I've got Bob Wright's face right in front of me, and the guy's talking to me. He's thoroughly squashed across the head of his femur into his pelvic region, and applied the ECG. And people are saying that just get the thing off him and get to hospital. And we're saying, guys, settle, everything will be okay, And you could see this fidgety expectation of they're not acting in the patient's interest.
Yeah.
Okay, so tourniquets on, 2 lines in, one's got bicarb set on, the other one is infusing Hemixel, the fluid replacement, and are we ready to lift? ECG's in place. Okay, tourniquets applied. Okay, start to lift the weight. And there's the hyperkalemia developing on the screen. Let the bicarb go. Roll that ECG at the same time. And as Bob said, when you get to that accident emergency area, you've got to have proof. Don't go there and thinking they'll believe you. You've got to have proof. And if you don't show them the tall peak T waves on the ECG, and then after you've given the bicarb, they reduce, then you'll lose the argument in the A&E from some skeptical doctor who doesn't believe it. And if you have any trouble with them, just ring me. So this guy was noticed by the 9 network television crew. And they made a big fuss of this crush syndrome. Oh, it actually works. Yeah, it works for this reason. Interview Dr. Bob Wright and he'll tell you all about it. So it generated a whole lot of interest. For me on the road, I had that experience. And then the next time was the Newcastle earthquake. And the Newcastle earthquake was alive with people who were crushed with hyperkalemia. It was alive with people who had legs sheared off by flying sheets of galvanized iron. Horrific injuries in the space of 2 or 3 minutes. Buildings collapsing, providing a wealth of work and experience, if you can look at it in purely unemotional terms,
Yep.
And so my next experience of the crush syndrome came in the earthquake. I was dispatched to a place called the Newcastle Workers Club, and 3 floors had cascaded into the basement, bringing with them cars that were parked on the upper levels, bringing with them all the poker machines off the upper floors, bringing with them the people that were surrounding those poker machines, and then thoroughly burying them after a 40-metre fall, cascading. How they remained alive after that fall has got me to this day still be. But there were people alive in that wreckage. And so what began was a fellow called Albert Bender was trapped to the waist, and a colleague of mine, Mal Martin, was down there about 20 minutes before I reached the Workers' Club, which was surrounded in the greatest cement dust cloud. On a sunny morning, you could not see through the cement cloud out the front of the Workers' Club. The cement dust just would not settle. There was no wind at all. And so it was like walking through a London fog. And when I walked up, there was a police sergeant there. And I can't, sometimes I can recall his name, but not in the moment. And he said, "Oh, Al," he said, "look, there's trapped people down there. One of your mates is down there." He said, "I suggest you go in there, but he said, be careful, because the way to get in was a 45-degree angled slab out of whatever wall, I don't know. But so with a drug box, an oxyviver, and on both sides of me, it was like skating down a skating rink on my bum, down this 45 thing into the bowels of the Workers' Club. And presently I came across Mal, and he's got 2 lines in this Albert Bender. Albert's got 1,000 ton across his waist. He was crushed thoroughly. And he said, before you ask, Al, he said, "No, I can't get tourniquets on. He's buried to his umbilicus, But he's talking. Yeah. He's talking like we are now." And he said, "But you watch this, Al. I'll stop pumping the Hemix, Al." As soon as he stopped pumping, he'd just slump into unconsciousness. He'd pump it up again, and out he comes. So you're only perfusing from his umbilicus to his brain. I said, "How long's he got, Mal?" And he said, 10 minutes. But I can hear voices coming from over here underneath all that reinforcing steel and whatever. So, long story short, it presented a 3-metre V-shaped shaft into the bowels of the place. And lo and behold, there's 4 people trapped down there. So I was lowered into them by fire hose. There was no rope, like rescue units were all over the city doing things. And so the fireys had come down and they had a fire hose tied around my armpits, my gear in both hands, and lowered me into this pit. And when I stood up down there, you couldn't see people. They were covered in like a foot of cement dust. All you could hear was their voices coming out of the cement dust, and clouds of cement dust down this hole. And they lowered me on top of a lady with a fractured pelvis. And, she let out a blood-curdling scream with this bloke now standing on it. And rapidly I shifted my position, and then I stood on a woman who was dead beside her, and tried to make out who else was trapped there. And I could hear this man's voice, 2 meters away. And he said, "Oh, there's a woman trapped on the other, or she's stuck under the cement on the other side of her." So 4 people in total. I thought, I'll have to start the job on this lady that I've just stood on. So fractured pelvis, long job in the cramped conditions. To get the cement dust off was the thing, to even get a vein to appear that was semi-clean, with all this debris and that around. And I was actually standing on the body of the lady beside her, but I didn't know she was there. She's under so much stuff.
What of this wife?
Yeah.
That was Norm Duffy's wife, yeah. Anyway, I've been standing on Miriam Duffy, and I didn't realise. But long story short, got this lady out, tied the fire hose round her, fractured pelvis, and you just couldn't there was no stretchers to get in, no spine boards to get in there. Everything was sort of in the throes of arriving. Got her up by the armpits, and then moved on to the next one. Well, this Norm Duffy kept insisting, he was quite conscious, trapped he was on his from his upper thighs down, but kept saying, when you fix this, mate, I don't know who you are, but when you fix this, we'll be all out in the sunshine together. And I know we'll all come out of this okay, And I just couldn't say that I didn't know the relationship between the lady who was dead and the lady that I'd just gotten out. I said, well, I'll start on you now. He said, no. You start on the lady on the other side of me. I'm fine, And I said, tell me what fine means. He said, doesn't matter what fine means. Please start on her. I want to see you get her out first. So it was a case of manoeuvring into where this other lady was, and she had multiple fractures and what have you. And it was a case of getting a line into her. I gave morphine like it was water, and eventually got her out. Then I came to concentrate on Norm, and we just talked like you and I, And little did I realise how crushed he was. So I got the ECG onto him, put it up on a corner of the rubble down there, and I can see tall peak T waves. Hello. I got down to where I could get to him, but I just couldn't get tourniquets on. He's trapped right to his pelvis. And so I thought, he's talking to me like you and I are. So, okay, lines in, ECG on, hemic cell flowing because he's got a blood pressure of something like 80, 90 systolic. And I thought as soon as I release, that's going to collapse because he'll just hose out. And if I can possibly get tourniquets on, I don't think I can because the slit to get him out was just so small. And I thought, how do I do this? I've got no lifting gear that will be able to fit in here. So I got down underneath him and with my gloves on, just started paring away at the concrete underneath him and finally got it loose enough. And I thought, my word, I've got to be quick here because the hyperkalemia will, travel to his heart and that'll be it. Got the fire hose under him, told him what I wanted of him, and said to Mal up above me, as quick as you can get bicarb into him because he's hyperkalemic, and blah, blah, blah. And he went into cardiac arrest as he got to Mal. Mal put him into a Stokes setter straight out into the centre island where a medical team was, 50 mils of Sodibic, and he turned around on the centre island. I really thought he was passed away. I thought he was dead. And my job then was to get the other deceased lady that was out, turns out was his wife, Miriam. And anyway, when I emerged later that afternoon from the Workers Club, they told me that Norm had survived. I regard it as the best Christmas present I'd ever received. Because in those hours down there, we became friends, in the cross-bantering tour. So
how long do you think it was between when you got down there and got him out?
What was that again?
How long do you think it was that you got down there and then got him out?
Well, I arrived down in there at about 11 o'clock. The earthquake was at 10:30. I was in with him about 11 o'clock, and I got him out at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So
yeah, right. Yep.
Yeah. But he was okay while he remained trapped,
Yeah.
But as soon as you release...
Yeah, a lot of people, especially if they don't have medical knowledge, don't understand that, once that crush syndrome sits, or develops, you're fine while you're crushed. But it's once you release that crush that things go very pear-shaped.
They're very pear-shaped, yeah. And
I've been to two in my career, and one passed away in hospital, and one was fine.
Yeah. And if you can crack that fine line and achieve the result, it's the most satisfying thing. Like Norm and I remained friends then for the next 12 years of his life. And would you believe when he passed away from cardiac arrest, Neville Greaves, who I was on with, who was my partner to go down into the Workers Club, that was with me that day, passing stuff down from up above and whatever with Mal Martin, Um, 12 years later, Norm had a cardiac arrest at his home. On the rotation of the rosters, I wasn't on, but Neville was. Neville zapped him and got him back again. They packaged him up to the John Hunter Hospital, put him on the helicopter, sent him to Sydney, where he died the following day. But
Okay.
so Nevy got him the second time. You wouldn't read about it. He was a wonderful man.
As a multicast situation in Newcastle, did you, because you're on the ground, was that your main role? Was that particular Newcastle Workers Club, was that kind of the end of the start and finish of your bit, or
on the earthquake, you mean?
Yeah.
Probably what I didn't allude to was where I went first. Well, I was asked to go first, was down what we call Beaumont Street. And we had 168 injured. And we had 3 deaths in Beaumont Street. And the remainder of the deaths occurred in the Workers Club. And I think there was one after that they attributed as the 14th victim. And I don't know all the details of where that person passed away. But yeah, our work was essentially down Beaumont Street, and then a message came through, could they have the paramedics at the Workers Club, as they have multiple people trapped.
Was there a good multicast system in place at that time?
No, I don't think so. No, Bob was trying to pioneer that and get that concept through, but I don't think it was developed as it should have been by the time the earthquake came along. It was interesting, the extremes that fear and exposure to severe trauma produces in people. You see all sorts of reactions: anger, frustration, sheer lack of understanding, you apply the principles that Bob Wright taught us, and I think they showed up as correct every time.
Yep.
We had so many patients down Beaumont Street. I thought, how in the hell are we going to get them to hospital? And this fella called Eddie came along there, and he was standing watching us treating people in the centre of the street there. And I must have said something out loud to him, mate, how are we going to get the people? And he said, I've got a government bus here. And I said, oh, what's your name, mate? And he said, oh, Eddie. I said, oh, mine's Al. I said, could you take these walking wounded for us? He said, of course I can. Yeah. I said, mate, that'd be great. So we bundled all these people onto a government bus. And then they came back to me later and said it was great because Eddie sang to us all the way to hospital.
Yeah, in those situations, as you alluded to, you definitely see the best of people and the best of society and the worst of society.
Yeah, you do too.
Yeah, multicas is one of those things that it doesn't matter how much you prep for them, and as high fidelity as you can get, nothing prepares you truly for the real thing.
Yeah. Well, one thing that Bob taught us in those days, he said, I want to see you blokes turn into directors of traffic. And we said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, at these very emotional scenes, you've got to have one person that emerges who can take control and direct the flow of traffic in and around emergency victims and their rescuers. And that's what he taught us to do. And I think as our careers continued, we developed that on the highways and byways. And, became them.
Yeah, in management roles, I often used to get into triage or that sort of thing. And it is really hard to do, to not treat and to just direct traffic and direct your people and take the emotion out of it. And that can be really hard to do.
Well, exactly so. Like at a cardiac arrest, he wanted the gas man doing the talking, no one else. Righto, mate, you can change over CPR now. He's tubed the patient, he's bagging away. Al, what do you got on the ECG screen? Can you give 10 of adrenaline? Can you do this? Can you do that? And he'd run the show. Otherwise, you get 1,000 cooks trying to bake the pie, and it just doesn't work. You've got people yelling and carrying on. One bloke does the directing of resources and how he wants it, and we just leave it at that. And he was absolutely right.
Yeah. The hardest part about it, I think, a multicast is knowing when to walk away from a person and move on to the next one.
Too true. Yeah, too true. And you can be tugged in a dozen different directions by emotional people, and how you prioritize.
And often the loudest ones are the ones that grab your attention, but they're often the ones that don't need your attention.
Exactly. The old thing, you've got two patients there, one's screaming and the other one's dead set unconscious. Which one do we go to? I'd like you to go to the unconscious person. They need you more than the screaming person. The fact that he can scream, two systems, brain and chest, is working perfectly.
Exactly right. Okay, let's move on to Rwanda. What happened in Rwanda? How were you involved?
I was actually at a recertification in Sydney. Paras had to go back. We were now called paramedics, by the way. and Johnny Gleason and myself were at recertification in Sydney. And they came to us somewhere during that week and said, the United Nations has made a request of the ambulance service, and they would like the new, or the relatively new, notion of paramedicine to be tested out in a war zone. We would like to see some volunteers who would volunteer to go to Rwanda. And everyone said, "Where's Rwanda?" It was not on our radar sort of thing in Australia, I guess. And long story short, John Gleason, myself, and a fellow called Kerry Thompson volunteered to go, and we were duly selected that we would proceed to Canberra for a briefing, and then we placed on an aircraft and make our way rapidly to Africa. So could we take equipment with us? No, that'll be provided in Africa. There was a lot of logistics, and we would work essentially with Médecins Sans Frontières and Care Australia, and be under their auspices for our own safety and what have you. And the Australian military they're not there yet, but they will come and they will offer assistance to you wherever it's needed by yourselves, So long story short, myself and Kerry proceeded to Rwanda, and John Gleason was detained in Australia for politics. It affected poor old John because he felt he'd let the team down. He hadn't let the team down at all. It was just politics here, which would probably take me too long to describe. But nevertheless, we arrived in Africa in the famous Entebbe airport in Uganda. And then the Americans were not allowed to operate in Rwanda because they'd just been in Somalia, and probably know the hit movie, I think it was Black Hawk Down.
Yep.
Because there were so many Americans killed there, President Clinton said they would not enter into the war zone in Rwanda, but they would provide the air link from Entebbe to Kigali, and they would ferry in equipment that was needed via their giant aircraft they had at Entebbe, the Galaxies and the Starlifters and the C-130s. So they teamed me up with a Victorian paramedic, Angus McDonnell, who was a Micah from Melbourne, and we were Micahs, as you know, as the description goes on in New South Wales. And so the two of us were made a team over there, and I must say, I didn't know Angus well, but he's now my best friend and has remained so ever since Rwanda. So wonderful guy. And we saw a lot. Pardon? Who's a doctor now? Yes, my wife just reminded me.
Okay.
In where you are.
Okay.
in Townsville. Dr. Angus McDonnell. Do you know the name?
No, I don't. No, I
Yeah.
don't.
Anyway, Angus has had a career in paramedicine and then becoming a doctor and then an anaesthetist. So he's been there, done that.
Yeah, wow.
So Angus and I lobbed into Kigali, the capital in Rwanda, via the Americans, shipping in our gear, and then back to Entebbe to be told the last plane can't take the ambulances. You'll be driving them from Kampala in Uganda down into Rwanda. So one of the big adventures of the trip, I guess you could say, was they came to us and said, could we take some Catholic nuns with us in the ambulances to Rwanda? And we said, what? We're serious. We want you to take these Catholic nuns. So Angus has got one in his ambulance. I've got one in mine. And the ambulances we were given were East German 18-berth ambulances, of which I used to fit routinely 32 people into. Mass casualty on the road. But anyway, we drove across the equator into Rwanda and arrived in Rwanda to just massacre. It was 55,000 people dead in the streets with the dogs eating them.
Oh, wow.
And it was mass casualty on steroids. The cruelty that we witnessed was just beyond compare. It's just astonishing by Western standards to see someone could be that cruel to somebody else,
Yeah.
So
are we talking sort of more bladed weapons or explosions or gunshots or mixture of everything?
it was a mixture of everything. There were like pamphlets distributed of the discarded munitions and weapons that you would come across set up as booby traps. So anywhere
right.
you went, you had to be very, very careful, like entering dwellings for wounded people that were reported there. It could be a trap, with munitions that were rigged up to explode. And then the barbarism that just went on in front of you in the streets of people being hacked to death with a machete. And so there was work aplenty.
Yeah. Yeah. Who were you responsible for? Just like who directed you? Like, where did you take them?
There was a United Nations control set up. Initially, you would just take them to an orphanage where some of the nurses that accompanied us in would carry out triage and treatment there. And then Médecins Sans Frontières came in and set up in Kigali Hospital. The Canadians and the Brits were already established. They were wonderful. So their R8 regimental aid post would take wounded and what have you. Became very good friends with the Canadians and the British. And Australia wasn't there at that stage. That came a little bit later. So we were busy treating, transporting, and restocking and going again. And, just all day, every day.
How long were you over there for?
5 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, I thought the first 3 weeks I had to go home. I don't know how much more of this I can take. But I think gradually I got a mindset of where I can cope with this. And I think that was set up by Angus and I being involved in the streets and what have you at home, where, trauma was the order of the day for those early paramedics. And we'd learned a lot of those values and whatever, how to conduct ourselves from Bob Wright, and came to the fore in a desperate place like Rwanda.
Yeah. How did Rwanda change you?
Badly. Yeah. I don't think one realises the extent that you will be affected, and you keep denying it to yourself and saying, no, I'm good, I'm okay. And there's so much work presented in front of you that you just have a mindset to keep going. And when you come to stop, when you come home, it hits you like a tornado. And psychologically, it's hard to rationalize.
Yeah. Is it also hard to integrate back into sort of like a Western society and the stuff we take for granted?
It was. And I had a very unsympathetic management who said to me that we were going to charge you with being absent without leave, because the sheer volume of work we were asked by Care Australia to extend our
Yeah. 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 Did you ever seek help psychologically? Because I mean, back in those days, it wasn't really a thing. Yeah. 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 And I think the problem is a lot of Australians wouldn't even have a clue about Rwanda, even now. Yeah. 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 Um, Tell me about this book. That's okay. So what's the book called? Yep. Yeah. Shout out to Penny. Penny was the one that got me in touch with you, and yeah, she was your co. Yep. Yep. She contacted me, and yeah, we organised this. So it's been, yeah. Shout out to Penny. Thank you for that. Um, are you going to do an audio book version? Yep. So I'll put a link to the publishing and all the details I have. I'll put a link in the bio of this podcast. How was it going back and reliving this? And I'm imagining you go into more detail than you've probably ever kind of gone into when you're researching when she's asking the questions. Yep. Yeah. And I think one of the things I've been trying to outline, and I really recommend that paramedics and other first responders and high trauma occupations do is is to keep a journal. It's not something I did, but I regret not doing it, because in my experience, that when things go wrong in your brain, you don't remember anything positive you've done. You don't remember the good things that you've had. You just go back to negatives, and it can be quite detrimental. Mm. Mm. Yep. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. And obviously we can't, we can't use report forms for patients in Australia. We can't keep them at home. That would that would not be welcomed. But I think having a journal, having something to go back on, that it doesn't need to be about specific. You don't need patient identifying. It's feelings, thoughts, achievements, that sort of thing. That we just the human brain is just naturally, it's naturally negative. And I think sometimes we need to remember the positive, and we need to save the positive. We save the negative easily. We need to put energy into saving the positive. Yep. 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 Yeah. And to be honest, this is exactly why I started this podcast, because I wanted to have a platform where somebody might recognize something they're going through somebody else's journey and story, and realize that they might need a bit of help, because I think we're very good at just keeping shit to ourselves. Whereas if we can just recognize, and you know, I think I don't know, maybe 15 episodes so far, and I've had at least half a dozen reach out and saying, you know, it helped me. I've got help as a result of it. And by sharing your story, by sharing our story, by you know, we can hopefully prevent some of these suicides, and yes, stop it in its tracks, because it's epidemic. Yep, yep. Yep. And I think the other thing you need is you need some the resilience that a little bit of life experience gives you. You need to know how to look after yourself, and don't get me wrong, it's not a blanket shield that, you know, you can still get broken no matter what. But I think if you're 20 years old, you haven't lived outside of mum and dad's place, and then you're going to uni, you're coming out, and then you're seeing what can be some bloody awful stuff. Not only just from accidents, but from what people can do to each other and treat each other. It's yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I was 27 when I started. I'm bloody glad I was 27. Yep. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's the best job in the world being a paramedic, but it's bloody tough. It's and I don't care how long you're in it for. It's going to have a cost. It just depends on what that cost is going to be. I was on another podcast called Two Ordinary Coppers, and they termed it really well with PTSD. The PTSD can vary from a swollen ankle to a fractured spine. Everybody's got something. Everybody's got something. It just depends, and it's not fluid. It's not linear. It can be very fluid. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a firm, people who've listened before will know I'm a firm believer that we need to offer more help to paramedics when they are hurt by their service, all first responders, not just paramedics, all first responders, because arguably we see more trauma than most veterans you've probably seen more than 1,000 paramedics just in Rwanda. But we need to look after our people afterwards because it is a traumatic job. We are getting hurt, and there is a cost for everyone who is a first responder. We see abnormal stuff. I'm not saying don't do it. I loved it. I'm privileged, and I am gutted that I can't do it anymore. But go in with your eyes open. Absolutely not. No, no. So you've got so many more stories, but you've got a book, so we're not going to go through them all because people won't buy the book. So, but this is just a snippet. Your awards, like I said in the introduction, you are according to your bio, you're the most decorated civilian since the Australian award system began. So that just says everything about you. So I'll list some of those in the bio of this podcast, and like I said, I'll list the publishing details for your book. So the book is called Through the Rubble by Alan Playford and Penny Keogh. And the digital version is out now at the hardback. Did you say 2nd of July? Yep. No worries. If you want to be put in touch, please give me a shout, and I can put you in touch with Alan or Penny. And yeah, please get around it, support it, share the story. People like Alan are absolute gold. He's already got a lot of awards, but you're the people that should be getting awards. You go above and beyond what humans need to do. And I thank you for your service. I thank you for everything you've done for the building of paramedicine into what it is now, because people like you, you did some of the hard yards. No worries at all. So they can search for Through the Rubble. Yeah. There we go. There you go. Looks great. Looks great. So Alan yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, mate. I really do appreciate you taking the time. I wish you every luck for your book, and I'm more than happy to have you on and share some more war stories, but I want people to buy your book. And really, yeah. And then if you want to go into more details down the track, I'd love to have you on again. All right, no worries. Thanks, everyone. If you've got any feedback, please contact me, contact@beyondthecall.au. Yeah, I'll see you at the next one. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Call. If you like what we're about, please make sure you subscribe, and if you can leave a review, that would be appreciated. If you have feedback or suggestions for future guests, please contact me via my socials. Please share with your networks and help me expand my reach. It's a great privilege for people to share their stories and allow us to go beyond the call.